final breath.
To most people, she appears as a department store mannequin made of plastic.
So is that a room you can stay in?
Yeah, but that's not a part of her room anymore. It was when she was living there. But see, in old boarding houses, there was no hallway. You just had to walk through somebody's room to get to yours. And so the toys were rearranged as if someone had been playing with them. And sometimes they claimed that the statue would actually move. The nose would wiggle, or it'd shed a tear or smile, freaky things like that. In the 70s, somehow the nose got knocked off. And people saw a little girl running away from the scene, so they thought maybe she knocked it off with a brick or something. They don't know, but they did repair the nose, and they put a little iron fence around it. And nowadays, people like to throw little baby dolls and Barbie dolls and teddy bears behind the fence at Gracie's feet. And often when you come back out there the next day, you'll find that those toys have been gathered up and wedged between the rails of the fence in little rows, kind of like she's making families, similar to what you see on the back of some people's minivans. But the strangest part of this whole Gracie Watson haunting actually occurs right here in the square, because for over 100 years, sometimes when people are walking through here late at night, they've claimed to see a little girl playing out by one of the fountains or the statue of Nathaniel Greene. And before they can get over to her to ask her where her parents are or what she's doing out so late, she turns and runs off into the night and will disappear into the darkness. But they say it looks just like the ghost of Gracie Watson. Woohoo! A twist! That's the first twist we've had! Woohoo! We got the twisters going on tonight! Nice job, thank you so much. Nice! Beside Wanda! Anyone else? Anyone else? Casimir Pulaski, first forward officer to be slain in the American Revolution. He died leading a drunken charge against the British here in Savannah, and his namesake hotel used to stand behind me where the Regent's Bank stands today. In the old days, the Pulaski House Hotel was managed by a family named the Watsons, and they had a daughter named Gracie who used to play out here in the square all the time. And this was the 1880s. It was right after the last of the major yellow fever epidemics. And so most of the children in that decade, in the 1870s, had died. And so Gracie was kind of like a glimmer of hope for Savannahans to see a child playing out here in Johnson Square every day. And she was a very friendly little girl. She liked to sing people the songs that she learned in church when they come out here at lunch. And everybody in Savannah knew her because everybody knew the Watsons and the Pulaski House, and this is where you would often come to mingle. But at the age of only 6 years old, one horrible winter, Gracie Watson caught pneumonia and died, and the whole city went into mourning. Her grief-stricken father gave her black and white photo, her death photo, to the sculptor John Waltz, who was working on the Telfair Arts Museum at the time, and he designed and built a statue of Gracie that's out in Bonaventure Cemetery on the way to Tybee, where she's buried. Now, ever since that statue was built, people have been talking about all the weird things that go on around the grave. The children in the neighborhood used to love to play around Gracie's grave. They'd leave their toys out overnight, and sometimes when they'd come to this day, the largest square, and when you got a name like Johnson, it's good to be the largest. It's no coincidence that it has the tallest, most phallic monument in all of Savannah, which was erected for a man named Nathaniel Greene. He was a naval commander, and he was actually buried with his arch enemy, a naval commander from the English Navy, for over 100 years in Colonial Park Cemetery until they finally moved him here and buried him where his monument is today. And on his plantation after his death, the cotton gin was invented by his widow and the tutor of his children, later the lover of his widow, a tutor of his children, lover of his widow, Eli Whitney. You may have heard of him in the history books. Miss Green came up with the wiring from disassembling an old bird cage and contributed to the invention. But also on the square was a commemoration for another revolutionary. Nice! That was an excellent creative way of doing it. There we go, there we go! Awesome! And what they describe, okay, like the one woman that I met, I was doing a her store, and I didn't tell the story of the Marshall House on that tour, and I was coming back, and she said, "What is that hotel that's so haunted?" And I said, "Which one?" I said, "There's a bunch of haunted hotels." And she said, "Well, it's the one on Broad Street." And I said, "Well, there's a couple on Broad Street." And she said, I said, "Why don't you describe what happened there, and I'll tell you what house it is." And she said, "Okay." And her husband was standing right there. She said when they went on their honeymoon, they took a couple months off and went to a bunch of different places. One of the places were in Savannah, and they stayed in this old hotel. And she said that while she was sleeping, she had this terrible dream where she was out in the hall of a hotel. The dream started, half from these psychoerotic dreams in the middle of the night, and they can't move. They can see the room around them, but they can't move out of their bed. They feel a weight on their chest, and they're not sure if they're in the dream or they're awake. And sometimes they have to lay there until dawn light comes before they wake up. But when they look in the mirror the next morning, they find that there is a bite mark on their neck, like a hickey, or like when a kid bites his arm, and then you can see like the teeth marks for a few seconds. It's kind of like that. And what was interesting is Stan Gooch said that this happened, most of the women that it happened to in all these reports over the years that he had studied, he said most often the women are about the age of puberty or the age of menopause. And he theorized, because he was all into the reptilian mind and the subconscious, he said, well, during this life change where there's a biological change going on, that's when the subconscious can come out to play and your psychic powers can manifest. And so he thought of it as mind over matter, where these women were actually showing outward evidence in their body of what they were experiencing during the dream. And I thought that made a lot of sense. I mean, it makes sense, right? Sounds logical. Alien mind and the subconscious and Neanderthal hybridization, things like that. He had written a book, I think it's called Poltergeist, Incubi, and Other Spirits, or something like that. Anyway, he talked about what is called an incubus. Have y'all ever heard of this? Not the band, but not the band. Band's named after the ghost or demon or whatever you want to talk about it. But basically, it's one of the oldest legends in Western civilization, because the first description of an incubus attack is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is like 1500 BC. And what it is these women. It stretched right across the alleyway to the lot behind it. And this is where you bought your ticket and hung out before the doors opened for the show. In the 1800s, one of the actors, a female actor, died on stage, and they couldn't figure out why. They say natural causes, but they couldn't determine the reason why she passed out and died on stage. But ever since then, people have reported seeing the ghost of a woman peeking out from the very back of the building, as if she's peeking out into the lobby to see how many people have showed up for her performance that night. Now, after they got rid of the auditorium, this became a movie house for a while. And then later on, in the 80s, now, became the largest employer of Savannahans in the whole city, and he met and married a fellow Irish immigrant. Together they practiced the Roman Catholic form of birth control and had 12 children who moved to adulthood. Each child had their own room up on the second or third floor of the Kehoe mansion, and Miss Kehoe used to go around to each child's room every single night, tuck them in and give them a kiss. People who stay there today sometimes report that this beautiful red-haired apparition glides into the room, kisses her on the cheek, and disappears. Some people say there's way older cities in the world than us. Second place, St. Augustine, is twice as old as Savannah. And New Orleans is 200 years older. Yeah. And Charleston, even, our rival city, is 100 years older. And all those places I just mentioned had some degree of problem with the yellow fevers as well, especially New Orleans. So it should probably be, if it was just about the old age and the yellow fevers, it would probably be New Orleans or St. Augustine. But there's something else that people don't talk about here, and that's the fact that Savannah is built on the oldest Native American burial mound in the country. That's the Bilbo Mound, and it dates to 3,600 BC. At that time, the Native Americans were burying their dead in oyster shell middens, and each generation would contribute more and more bodies and more oyster shells. And this created a big mound right here where Savannah is today,